The morning air was crisp and cold, an autumn promise clinging to the city streets before the sun could warm them. For Elijah Olson Keller, the air was a symphony of sensations. He felt the dampness on his skin, heard the distant hum of early cars as a low, continuous note, and saw the world in patterns. Green plastic bottles, silver metal caps, crumpled papers in shades of blue and gray. It wasn't trash. It was material. It was pieces of a puzzle only he could see. With the precision of an artist, he swept and sorted, aligning the objects on the sidewalk in geometric sequences that soothed the noise inside his head. Each object had its place, each color, its frequency. It was his way of bringing order to the world's chaos. From where are you watching this story now? Wherever you are, look around and think of the people you pass every day and never truly see. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens when we finally open our eyes. Order was broken by a harsh sound, sharp bark, followed by a voice that sliced through the air like a whip. "What the hell are you doing? You're blocking the way." Elijah looked up, blinking. The sunlight seemed to have concentrated into a single point, the polished brass buttons of a pristine military uniform. The man wearing it, General Alexander Richard, held the leash of a low, growling German shepherd. The general saw no art. He saw dirt, disorder, and obstruction. He saw a black man in a sanitation uniform, a nobody in his path. "Clean this garbage up, now!" The voice was an explosion. The street sounds, once a manageable hum, became a deafening cacophony in Elijah's mind. He couldn't respond. The words wouldn't come. He just shook his head slightly, a tick that calmed him. The general interpreted the silence as defiance. With a puff of disdain, he stepped forward, and with the toe of his polished boot, kicked the row of plastic bottles. The sound of plastic shattering against concrete was like a gunshot in Elijah's silence. His masterpiece, his piece undone in an instant of casual violence. Elijah's world disintegrated. He flinched, covering his ears, as the general strode away, muttering about a lack of discipline in the world. The sidewalk, once a sanctuary of order, was now just scattered trash. "My name is Hannah Becker and Elijah is my son." When people look at him, they see a big, quiet man who collects the city's garbage. They see the orange uniform and look away. Some, like that general, see something that bothers them, something they think needs to be fixed or removed. But I see the boy who, at 4 years old, wouldn't speak, but could assemble a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle with his back to the picture, guided only by the shape of the pieces. I see the teenager who found solace in the perfect alignment of books on a shelf, creating patterns of color and height that held a secret, beautiful logic. The world calls him autistic. It's a label, a box where they try to fit the immensity of my son's mind. To me, he is just Elijah. From a young age, the world was too loud for him. Sounds, lights, touches, emotions. Everything came in unfiltered, a sensory avalanche that left him overwhelmed. Words were difficult. Expressing what he felt was like trying to hold water with his hands. But patterns, patterns were his language. They were his refuge. In an unpredictable and frightening world, repetition, sequence, and symmetry were his anchor. He saw patterns in everything. The leaves on trees, the cracks in the sidewalk, the flow of traffic. And he needed to create his own. It was like breathing. When he got the job as a sanitation worker, many looked on with pity. "Such a waste," some relatives said. He was so good at math. They didn't understand. For Elijah, that job wasn't a step backward. It was freedom. Out there, in the quiet pre-dawn streets, he wasn't the weird kid. He was the master of a universe of discarded objects. He found a peace that no office or classroom ever offered him. He transformed the city's chaos into order. Those sculptures he made with the trash, I called them his art installations. They were ephemeral, lasting only until the garbage truck passed. But they were beautiful. They were his way of talking to the world, of saying, "I am here, and I see beauty where you only see trash." When he showed me, or rather showed me on his phone, the photo of what General Alexander Richard did, my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't about the kicked trash. It was about the kick to my son's soul. It was about that man looking at the purest, most honest thing Elijah produced and seeing only filth. It was the embodiment of a lifetime of misunderstanding, of veiled contempt, of sidelong glances. The general didn't just destroy a row of bottles. He spat on the only language my son felt safe to speak, and in that moment, I felt a burning rage, a mother's rage, but beneath it, the old, familiar fear, the fear that the world with its polished boots and its haste would always crush the quiet beauty of my son. I held him that night as he rocked back and forth on the sofa, and I promised him, and myself, that somehow, the world would one day have to see. I just didn't imagine how. This journey for the world to see Elijah was long and full of dead ends. I remember the early years, the relentless search for a diagnosis, for an answer. Each specialist was a new promise, a new hope that often ended in frustration. We went through therapists who insisted he needed to learn to make eye contact. Dr. Inez Nielsen, a well-meaning woman with an office full of diplomas, said eye contact was the gateway to social connection. She didn't understand that for Elijah, looking someone in the eye was like staring into the sun. It was painful, invasive. Forcing him to do it didn't connect him. It disconnected him from himself. It drowned him in a sea of stimuli. We tried behavioral therapies that promised to normalize his actions. They wanted to eliminate his body rocking, his stimming, because it wasn't socially acceptable. They saw a symptom to be corrected, not a self-regulation mechanism that helped him cope with an overwhelming world. It was like trying to forbid someone from breathing because the sound bothered you. Each session was a battle. I saw him shrink, his light dim a little more each time he was told that his natural way of existing was wrong. School was another battlefield. They promised inclusion, but what they offered was isolation. They put him in a support room with an assistant teacher, Mr. Tuan Muller, who, while kind, was overwhelmed and inadequately trained. Elijah sat in the back of the room, drawing complex patterns in his notebooks, while the rest of the class moved forward. Teachers saw him as disinterested, even defiant. They didn't see the mathematical genius hidden behind the silence, the mind that solved logic problems for fun but froze when asked to read a paragraph aloud. I remember a parent-teacher conference with the principal, Mrs. Olivia Thomas. She told me, with a pity that turned my stomach, "Mrs. Becker, perhaps we should consider a more specialized school. He's disrupting the class's pace." Disrupting. My son wasn't a problem to be solved. He was a child who learned differently, but to them, he was a deviation from the norm, a snag in the educational production line. Every friendly piece of advice, every well-intentioned suggestion was a small cut in our soul. "Have you tried a different diet? He just needs more discipline. Maybe if you were firmer." The social pressure was overwhelming. They wanted me to mold him, to force him into a mold that wasn't made for him. The pain of seeing your child rejected in so many ways is indescribable. It's a constant mourning for the acceptance that never arrives. It's the feeling of always fighting against the tide, of shouting in a room where no one hears you. This pursuit of a cure or adjustment was our false hope, the hope that if we just tried hard enough, the world would finally accept him. The painful truth I took years to understand is that it wasn't Elijah who needed to be fixed. It was the world. The real conflict, the one that hurts deepest, isn't the open fight. It's the quiet indifference, the prejudice disguised as bureaucracy. After the incident with General Alexander Richard, my first reaction was fury. I wanted justice. I went to the sanitation company where Elijah worked. I wanted to file a formal complaint. I was met by Jan Hall, the shift supervisor. He was a tired man with deep circles under his eyes and a stack of papers on his desk. He listened to my story patiently, nodding his head at some points. When I finished, he sighed. "Look, Mrs. Becker, I'm truly sorry about what happened to your son. I really am. But it's his word against an army general's. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I understood. Perfectly. He was saying that my son, a black autistic sanitation worker, had no voice. His reality didn't matter against status and power. But there were witnesses, I insisted. Other people saw it. Jan Hall rubbed the back of his neck. People don't want to get involved. Nobody wants trouble with a big shot like that. The best thing to do is just let it go. Elijah's all right, isn't he? Nobody got physically hurt. Physically. As if the wounds of the soul didn't count. As if the humiliation and the pain of invisibility were mere details. This wasn't a movie villain. Jan Hall wasn't a bad man. He was a pragmatic man, trapped in a system that taught him not to rock the boat. He was the face of real human conflict, complacency, the fear of rocking the boat, choosing the easier path, even if it's the path of injustice. I talked to Elijah's father, my ex-husband, Jacob Kaya. Jacob always had a hard time accepting Elijah's diagnosis. He loved him, no doubt, but in a way that always held a hint of disappointment. He wanted a son who played sports, who went out with friends, who followed in his footsteps. When I told him about the general, his reaction was anger, but anger directed at the wrong place. Why does he have to do these things on the street? If he acted normally, this wouldn't have happened. Act normally. That phrase was a knife. Jacob wasn't cruel. He was afraid. Afraid of what others thought, afraid his son would never fit in. His denial was a form of self-protection, a shield against the pain of having a son the world didn't understand. He couldn't see that the problem wasn't Elijah's behavior, but the general's intolerance. The real conflict wasn't the kick on the sidewalk. It was the conversation in the kitchen with Jacob. It was Jan Hall's tired look. It was the chorus of voices over the years telling us to be more discreet, less weird, not to draw attention. It was the dilemma of fighting a battle everyone said was impossible, or swallowing our pride and protecting my son from more pain. It was the crushing weight of knowing that more often than not, the world doesn't offer epic battles between good and evil, but a slow, exhausting war of attrition against indifference. And that war, too often, makes us feel utterly alone. Change never happens like it does in the movies, with a grand fanfare and a moment of revelation. It arrives silently, through a back door no one expected. Our back door was named Sophia Kaczmarek. Hundreds of miles away in a sterile, windowless office deep within the Pentagon, Sophia, a young cryptography analyst, was about to give up. For weeks, she and her team had stared at a screen filled with what looked like digital noise, a code from an adversary group that no one could crack. The nation's most powerful supercomputers had churned through it relentlessly and found nothing. No pattern, no key. It was a dead end, and intelligence suggested time was running out. Frustrated? She did. Something she shouldn't have. She opened a browser and started scrolling through a local news feed from her hometown. A small nostalgic comfort. That's when she saw it. A small item on a community blog, with a grainy photo taken by a cell phone. The headline was insignificant. Sidewalk showdown. Sanitation worker confronted. The photo showed the moment before the general's kick, and on the ground, clear as day, was Elijah's art, a sequence of bottle caps, colored glass shards, and aluminum pull tabs arranged in a complex logarithmic spiral. Sophia froze. She saw no trash. She, who spent 10 hours a day searching for patterns amidst chaos, saw a pattern where no one else would. The sequence, the progression, the way the elements clustered and diverged. It had a syntax, a visual grammar. Something in her mind, trained to decipher the indecipherable, connected the dots. She minimized the news and opened the enemy code screen, the digital noise. But now, she no longer saw it as noise. She saw the same principles, the same groupings, the same nonlinear logic. The code wasn't based on traditional mathematics. It was based on a system of visual and spatial patterns. It was insane, an impossible coincidence. She took the idea to her superior, Luca Carter. He looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Sophia, you're telling me the key to a state-of-the-art military code is in a pile of garbage arranged by a sanitation worker." The idea was ridiculous. "It's not garbage," she replied, with a conviction she didn't even know she had. "It's a system. It's a language." Luca dismissed her, telling her to focus on the real work. But Sophia couldn't forget. That night, she printed the photo of Elijah's work and the code screen. She laid them side by side. Using the arrangement of the bottle caps as a cipher, as a Rosetta Stone, she began to translate a small block of the code. The random letters and numbers started to morph into words, coordinates, a code name, operation, bolt drop. The breakthrough wasn't a shout of eureka. It was a whisper in the silence of a late-night office, a quiet discovery, made by a stubborn analyst who saw value where the world saw only trash, and by a man who, unknowingly, spoke the same language as the world's most guarded secrets. When Luca Carter saw the decoded coordinates and operation name the next morning, his skepticism evaporated. replaced by an electric shock. Protocols were immediately engaged. The situation escalated, from a junior analyst's wild theory to a matter of national security in a matter of minutes. But they had a problem. Their Rosetta Stone, the only person in the world who intuitively understood that language, was an autistic sanitation worker who, according to preliminary reports, was largely nonverbal under stress. They couldn't just haul him into an interrogation room. The approach had to be different. It was Sofia Kaczmarek who insisted on leading the contact. "He doesn't think like us," she told a group of high-ranking officers. "We can't force him. We have to enter his world." 2 days later, instead of a black government car, a nondescript van pulled up in front of our small apartment. Sofia got out. She wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a t-shirt. She introduced herself to me with a calm and respect I hadn't seen in years. She explained the situation in the simplest terms she could. My first instinct was fear. The government, the Pentagon, that was the general's world. The world that had hurt my son. But there was something in Sofia's eyes, a sincerity and an urgency that made me listen. The first small victory was Elijah agreeing to go with them. Not because he understood national security, but because Sofia didn't pressure him. She simply showed him on a tablet the photo of his sidewalk art, and next to it, the code screen. Elijah looked at the two images for a long time, and then, for the first time since the incident, I saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. He pointed to the code screen and then to the photo, and nodded. He recognized the conversation. They took him to a quiet room, a space designed for people with sensory sensitivities. The lighting was soft, the walls soundproofed. There was no interrogation table but a large rug on the floor, and on the rug there were boxes and more boxes of objects, colorful blocks, beads, metal pieces, exactly the kinds of things he used to create his patterns. Sofia sat on the floor, at a respectful distance. She didn't ask questions. She just pushed a large screen closer to him, displaying the complete code. "We don't understand this, Elijah," she said softly. "Can you show us?" Elijah looked at the screen, then at the objects on the floor. His fingers began to move, slowly, hesitantly at first, and then with mesmerizing fluidity, he began to recreate the code on the floor. He wasn't just copying, he was extrapolating, continuing the sequence, filling in the missing gaps. Each color block represented a command, each metal piece, a target. He was building a three-dimensional map of the attack plan. The officers and analysts watched from behind a one-way mirror, in absolute silence. They saw a man the world had dismissed as deficient translating, in real time, a code their billion-dollar computers couldn't even scratch. The second, and bigger, small victory was when Elijah stopped, looked at a specific section of his construction, and dismantled it, shaking his head. He rebuilt it, in a slightly different way. Sofia noticed. "What was that?" she asked through the microphone. The analyst next to her, Mateo Garcia Ito, gasped. "He's not just translating. He's found an error in their code, a glitch. He's showing us the vulnerability." In that moment, Elijah wasn't a patient, wasn't a victim, wasn't a sanitation worker. He was the most brilliant cryptanalyst on the planet, and his silent victory, on a floor covered in colored blocks, echoed through the most powerful corridors of the country. Watching it all unfold behind the glass was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. For years, I fought for people to see the value in my son. I described his mind as brilliant, his perception as unique, and I was always met with condescending smiles and pats on the back. "Of course, dear, every mother thinks her child is special." They saw his communication difficulties, his repetitive behaviors, and drew a line there. His story, to them, was one of limitations, and there he was, in the heart of the country's defense system, and the smartest men and women in the room were silent, awestruck, learning from him. I saw the face of Sofia Kaczmarek, the young woman who found him, and she wasn't looking at him with pity, but with a deep, genuine respect. She saw him, truly saw him. In that moment, I realized the depth of my own transformation. For a long time, even in my fervent defense of him, a part of me still viewed his condition through the world's lens. I saw it as a challenge to be overcome, a difficulty to learn to live with. I loved him, despite his autism. But there, in that silent room, I understood. I was wrong. His brilliance didn't exist, despite his autism. It existed because of his autism. The same brain wiring that made casual conversation an unbearable challenge was what allowed him to see the universe in a handful of bottle caps. The same sensitivity that made him flinch at a loud sound was what gave him the ability to perceive the subtlest nuances in a complex system. His mind wasn't a defective version of a normal mind. It was a different kind of mind, with a different operating system, capable of feats neurotypical minds could never conceive. All those obsessions therapists tried to eliminate, those restricted behaviors schools tried to punish, were, in fact, his practice, his training. He had spent his entire life specializing in that language of patterns, the only one that made sense to him. The world called it obsession. God called it talent. And I, his mother, who loved him more than anything, could only grasp the magnitude of it that day. True acceptance isn't just tolerating differences. It's recognizing the strength that lies within them. It's stopping trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and instead building something new around the beauty of that square peg. My son didn't need to be fixed. The world needed a new pair of glasses to see what had always been there. And ironically, it took a national security threat for them to finally clean the lenses. The full decoding of the attack took nearly 18 hours. Elijah worked tirelessly, driven by a focus that only he possessed. With his help, they not only understood the plan, a devastating cyber attack aimed at shutting down the eastern seaboard's power grid, but also discovered the glitch Mateo Garcia Ito had spotted. It was a backdoor, a vulnerability that would allow them not only to block the attack, but to reverse it against the aggressors. The operation was an absolute success. The attack was neutralized before it even began. The closure to all of this wasn't a parade or a medal for Elijah. He wouldn't have wanted that. It was something far quieter, more meaningful. A few days later, we were invited to a debriefing at the Pentagon. It was a formal conference room with a long, polished wooden table. High-ranking officers were present, including Luca and Sophia's boss. And, at the end of the table, sat General Alexander Richard. He had been summoned without knowing why. When he entered and saw Elijah seated at the table beside me, his face went through a shocking transformation. Confusion, irritation, and then, as the agency director began to speak, describing the crucial role of a civilian consultant in preventing a national catastrophe, the general's face paled. The director never mentioned the sidewalk incident. He didn't need to. Elijah's presence there, being honored at the center of power, was the most potent statement possible. The general looked at Elijah, the man he had scorned, kicked, and dismissed as trash, and saw a national hero. That moment was a perfect micro-revenge, not for cruelty, but for fairness. Reality simply asserted itself. Elijah's value, which had always existed, was finally made visible to the one who most refused to see it. The general didn't say a word the entire meeting. He just stood there, his world of rigid hierarchies and superficial judgments crumbling before his eyes. For Elijah, none of it mattered. He was more interested in the grain pattern of the wood on the table. He wasn't seeking revenge or recognition. He just wanted peace to be himself. And that's what they offered him. Not a 9-to-5 job, but a custom-tailored consultant position. They built a replica of the quiet room for him in a secure annex, stocked with all the materials he needed. His job would be to look at complex data, at noise that no one else could, understand, and find the patterns. They didn't ask him to change. They changed the environment for him. The pain of a lifetime of rejection doesn't disappear overnight. The scars are still there. But for the first time, we have more than just hope. We have tools. We have a path. The world is still a loud and often incomprehensible place. But now, Elijah has a place where his language is not only understood but celebrated. A place where his art isn't trash, but the key that saves nations. He still goes out on mornings, no longer as a sanitation worker, but because he likes the quiet and the order. And sometimes he still lines up some leaves or stones on the sidewalk, not out of necessity, but out of joy. And I watch him, no longer with a heart tight with fear, but with a deep peace, knowing that the universe, in its mysterious wisdom, finally found a way to show the world what I always knew, that my son's mind is not a disorder. It's a different kind of order, and it's beautiful. Person's true value is never on the surface. Often it hides in the places our society has taught us to ignore, in the people we are quickest to judge. Elijah's story reminds us that the greatest treasures can be found where we least expect them, if we have the courage and humility to truly look. If this story touched you, if it made you think or feel something, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your interaction helps this message reach further. Someone, somewhere, might need to hear that their difference isn't a flaw but their superpower.